I'm trying to figure out if this question is relevant to today or not. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the question is basically, what is evil? And the reason I'm asking this is, up until the orange stage of development, people really tended to ascribe supernatural qualities to the word evil. And these days, I think most integralists probably think of evil as, sort of a hybrid of arrested development in particular lines, along with certain mental dysfunctions like narcissism, psychopathy, sociopathy, the dissociative states that often result from these conditions, et cetera, as well as certain, biomechanical defects in the brain and all that. It's a very mundane sort of reinterpretation of the word evil. My question for you is, could there also be something metaphysical or post-metaphysical, some element to evil that exists? Maybe it's a pathological kink or addiction, or even a malevolent force in the subtle realm. You spent earlier talking about how you can have authentic experiences of deity mysticism within the subtle, and those deities tend to bring, oftentimes, they tend to be good, but I put that word in quotes because, a deity's definition of good and sort of a lowly human being's version of good might have some daylight between them. But is it possible that there are malevolent sort of influences, intelligences within the subtle that are also influencing our sort of ordinary human behaviors here and are acting as a source of evil?
Well, one thing is for sure, whatever we actually decide on this thing called evil, because evil does have a very long history, and in that history, there have been dozens of different explanations about what it is. But what doesn't change is the fact that the human heart does have a capacity for a genuine, gruesome malevolence. It just can do that. And that seems to be just an inherent part of not just human nature, but just manifestation itself. It's always manifesting in these various opposites. And so we have a capacity for genuine love and benevolence, and we have a capacity for real hatred and malevolence. And that malevolence has been the item that has been referred to as evil most often. So going back a fair way back in history, one of the most common, everybody was always looking for what was the cause of this malevolence. And so one of the earliest, of course, was that it was personification of malevolence itself, personification of evil. It was Lucifer, it was the devil. And this was a real existing person thing that had a capacity to get into the human heart and either convince it by whispering in its ear with promises of wealth, of fame, or whatnot, or it could just get in and take it over and force it to commit these malevolent acts. But malevolent acts are undeniable. We have, in the recent world, for example, an Auschwitz guard who tortures human beings. And then after doing that, just to make sure how horrible life is for them, they make them pick up a 100-pound sack of salt and carry it all the way across the yard. And then once they've done that, they have to turn around and carry it all the way back across the yard. Or they have to dig a hole until it's 6 feet down and then cover it up. And then they have to go 3 feet over, dig another hole, and then cover it up. This is absolute utter meaninglessness of the situation, added to the hopelessness of the situation and the torture that you're doing. And this is a human being intentionally doing this to somebody. That's malevolence. That's absolute malevolence. It was so bad, the Nuremberg trials invented a whole new concept They said, this is so evil that it's not even something that like a French person did to a German or a German person did to an Austrian. This is a crime against all humanity. That's evil. So we know it's there. So the question is, why is it there? It used to be Lucifer is doing it. And there were a lot of reasons for that. For Milton, of course, Lucifer was the highest angel in God's kingdom. And he wanted to rule himself. So better to be free in hell than serve in heaven. And his idea of hell, what Milton made it be, was the assumption that rationality itself could explain everything. And so that was Milton's notion of evil, because it was cutting out the divine. And that was making you divine. In other words, that was what was evil. And that was where problems would come from. We have metaphysicians around the time that would try to sort of, think more philosophically about this. One of the most common explanations there is that, first of all, how could there be evil in a world that was created by this all good deity? And the idea was that evil wasn't itself an actual presence or force. It was more like a shadow. It was the absence of light. So it wasn't a real presence itself. It was the absence of the divine and the absence of light. And that shadow is what was evil. Didn't have an ontological reality itself, but it was there in a sense. And it could certainly have impact on human beings. And so you would get over evil by discovering the light. You get over evil by discovering the divine. And then, as you say, as we get more into the modern era, then things get medicalized, and we recognize that there are people that do horrifying things, and we have a list of causes for that. Preeminent in today's world is it's a broken brain, some neurophysiological backfire. It's a psychiatric disorder, it's sociopathic, it's psychopathic, it's some sort of damaged upbringing. And these have all been sort of laid out. But the fact is that you still find the existence of malevolence. Mm-hmm. And it's just as malevolent as it was all the way back to the earliest shamans and all the way through Auschwitz guards. And the conclusion from all of that is that it really is at least a tendency in every human heart. And just as every human heart has a capacity for love and benevolence, it has the capacity for hate and malevolence. And it's much better to realize that you have a capacity for malevolence and not act on it than it is to not realize you have a capacity for malevolence, because that's when it catches you from behind. So one of the ways to read history, if you're reading about the Holocaust, for example, most of the time the tendency is to just distance yourself from the malevolence and say, oh, here's this horrible thing that person is doing. Phew, I could never do that. And then, oh, look at what they did here. Oh, that's horrible. I would never do that. And then, oh, they did this. Oh, I would never do that. But the fact is, that's not the way to read history. You need to read history saying, I could have done that. What part of me could have done that? That's the only way you're going to get that understanding of the full human capacity that you have. And so realizing that you have it and not acting on it is better than simply not realizing that you have it. And so that's a real key. And as for a kind of metaphysical evil, only in the sense, I think, in that this manifest universe really is a manifest world of opposites. It's a strange thing, but we have, this thing exists, and the only way that you can tell it apart from something over here is that it's different from something over here. So you get these opposites. There are positive charges, negative charges, electrons, protons. I mean, all the way down there. There are quarks with different spins, different colors. These all are in opposite configurations. Human emotions tend to be opposite. Pleasure, pain, joy, sorrow, happiness, depression, on and on. And so, and the whole traditions themselves refer to samsara as the world of opposites. Mm. And so the Upanishads define enlightenment as being freed from the pairs of opposites. And the Christian mystics would say the divine is overcoming opposites. They call it the coincidentia oppositorum, the coincidence of opposites, the unity of opposites. And so because this is a world of opposites, to the extent that in that world we do have access to love and benevolence, there will be access to hatred and malevolence. And that seems to have been here from the beginning. And it's been such a problem because the better angels of our nature are alarmed by the malevolence that we've always had to come up with some really bad thing that's causing some people to be evil. Mm-hmm. And we've done that from the very, very beginning. And it's understandable. And we've got down to today with our modern sort of scientific explanation for why people are evil or malevolent. And I'm sure 100, 200 years from now, it'll be some artificial intelligence reason that they're malevolent assholes all over the place. But it does seem to be metaphysical in at least that sense. Mm. It's something that's with us and something that, again, the best way to make sure you're not acting on it is to realize just how you can do that. If you think you couldn't be a guard at Auschwitz, you don't know the full depths of your own being. You don't. So you're kidding yourself. Right. So read history that way, and that's the best protection you'll have against acting on your malevolence.
Oh, I loved that invitation for a practice, Ken, because that practice itself is extinguishing evil, right? Insofar as evil is those aspects that are not touched by light, by bringing it into awareness, you are bathing it in light.
Yep.
And then it loses its power, its potency, and its sort of destructive influence upon us. So I think in this conversation we have established that within the subtle there are dragons, there are deities, and hey, maybe there's some demons too.
Yep.
All right.
It's just becoming one that the emotion of love is. When you're one with everything, that's an unconditional, infinite love. And that's why, you find a lot of names given to the ultimate. And actually, we talked about the manifest world being a world of opposites. And most of the opposites have like a what we would consider a good pole and a bad pole. So there's good versus evil. There's happy versus sad. There's love versus hate. There's rich versus poor. There's hungry versus full, those kinds of things. There's truth versus falsity, beauty versus ugliness, goodness versus evil. Most of the traditions around the world have taken almost any of those polarities and taken the good one, given it a capital letter, and identified that with God. And that capital letter version, like if it's capital L love, capital L love includes small love and small hate. So when you're experiencing capital L love, you love everything that's arising. You love small love that you might have for an individual person. But if hate comes up, you love that too. Although it's still hate and feels kind of bad, but you love it. The same thing with truth. If you believe if God is capital T truth, then if small truth comes up, that's true. As small falsehoods come up, That's true. So God has been called the good, the true, the beautiful, love, being, consciousness, bliss. I mean, on and on, almost every positive you can think of. And that's just an attempt to say God is radically all inclusive, using any terms you want. So if it's love, it means we love everything. And that's a very, even coming into that kind of feeling can be very hard. And I've mentioned this before, but it really does mean things like, I love my family, I love my friends, I love my colleagues, I love my work, I love my house, I love my partner, I love global warming, I love nuclear winter, I love murder and torture, I love terrorist acts, I love Al-Qaeda, I love genocide. I mean, literally everything that's arising is embraced with this all-embracing love. That doesn't stop us from making relative judgments. That's horrible. I want to stop global warming. I want to stop genocide. But unconditional love is love coming from the ground of all being. And the ground of all being is what's present in anything that exists. I mean, if something didn't have a ground of all being, it wouldn't exist. It's the ground of all being. So whatever exists has this ground of all being. And if that's experienced as love, then that's unconditional love for everything that exists. And that's embodied Turiatita. That's an embodied feeling that goes with an awareness that is including everything. The entire universe is arising within your being and awareness, and you have an unconditional love for it.